Okie dokie, step 6, we actually attach the gearbox to our chassis. So, it's showing to hold the chassis upside down. I probably should have said welcome back to the channel or something polite like that, eh? So, welcome back to the channel. Today we are building a Hornet again. So how you been since the last video? Don't all answer at once. So where's my grease? Here we go. We're just going to grease up for this pivot shaft. Again, greasing up the hole. Then the shaft can slide through, and you watch the other end. It'll push grease out the other end. See that? And if I pull that shaft back out, you'll see, well, you can't see, but trust me, there is grease all over that shaft. Nice, quick, easy way to do it, and you know the grease has gone in there. So it tells you to grease up these parts here as well. I don't think I'm going to do that, actually. There's no point. If you were running the car, you'd probably do that. So these are side specific, so don't get them wrong. So, oh, now my greasy shaft just fell out. So this is what I was saying in the last video with this self-tapping screw in your pivots here. So this screw here holds that spring out of the way so that when you go to mount your actual gearbox, you're not fighting against those springs on both sides, which is what you need to do. Actually, no, you don't need to do that with the grasshopper. Tell a lie. Grasshopper doesn't slide up and down, does it? Don't listen to me. Okay, so I've always found this a bit fiddly. Oh, but once you get it started, in they go. So that is our rear gearbox mounts in. Now we just have to run our 4 screws in. Our 4 3x12 self-tapping screws. Again, just and again, I forgot grease. But yeah, just one at a time, leave them loose until they're all in. And then you can tighten them up. So now we have our rear gearbox installed, and you can see the action of that rolling rigid rear end. Now this is where these screws here have to come back out now, because they've been holding these springs up out of the way, which allowed us to get that gearbox in nice and easy, and they just get completely removed. And I reckon if you were to, once you pull these out, that spring obviously springs back down onto the gearbox shaft, and you can feel some resistance there under the spring, but not a lot. I reckon if you were to screw that screw straight back in, it'll put that spring under more tension, and that might make it a little bit more solid in the rear end there. Might make the springs actually work, or it might just bend the springs, which they end up doing anyway, so they really don't last long. So Nerf bars. So this top one here, it tells you to put a 3x8, I think it is. It's later on in the instructions, step 14, or 3x12s actually, they're a big one, with a washer. Well, I tend to do that in this step, because there's really no reason to wait until that far into the book, the manual. And I actually install the screw first, and just let it sit like that. We do that on both. So those screws are already in the Nerf bars there. so that when we do install our nerf bars, they just fall into place and we can actually screw everything in straight away. There's really no point in waiting until step 14 to put those screws in. I've built quite a few of these and I've never had to remove those screws for any reason, just so that you can continue with the build. So again, just applying grease to the actual screw holes, make it a little bit easier to get those screws in. An electric screwdriver really would be handy. I had a Sparky come into work a few months ago and he was using this electric screwdriver, and it was bloody brilliant because it actually had a ratchet setting on it so that you could adjust the torque on your screws. Right, so it looked exactly like a screwdriver, just like this, about this big. You could change the heads, obviously. And I was watching him just press a button, just run the screws into whatever he was doing, I forget. And it gets up to where the screw starts taking up a little bit of tension, and then because there's must be a kind of a ratcheting effect, he just used it as a normal screwdriver just to finish tightening up the screw. And I thought, that's bloody brilliant, we need one for these. So I'm going to have a look around for one of them. So you can see that as I was blabbing along, we've done these screws up in the side here, and that is step 6 done and complete. And now we're on to the rear shocks. So these shocks will probably be the end of this part 2 or part 3, whichever way you want to call it. I reckon it's part 3 because part 1 was the unboxing, wasn't it? Zach thinks it's part 2 because it's part 2 of the actual build. It's one of our little light-hearted arguments we have that goes on every now and then. We do like a good debate. So, rear dampers. These are interesting, these ones. They are also quite useless. I'm using Hornet rear dampers in the speedrun car, and I rebuilt them twice, and within a week or so they just leak. Leak all the oil out, pretty much. Because inside the shock body you don't put any O-rings in there or anything like your normal, like your CBAs and stuff like that. There's a little brass part in there that must get pushed in and pinned over somehow. Oh yes, it's pressed over. You can see that domed over there, so that must be done in a machine. And there must be some kind of seal in there from the factory, which is strange and interesting, because that makes them non-serviceable. Once they start leaking, that's it. They're going to leak forever. So our piston rods, there's your piston itself. And look how tiny that is. Bloody hell. Alright, so first off, we're going to get an E-clip. And I usually do this over the other side of the... Oh, you might see it. Yeah, you're in shot there. I just sit the E-clip in there, kind of hold it with my finger, transfer it to the edge of the bench there. And press it in. You can use the pliers. There we go. And once again, give it a spin. If you can't spin it, it's not on there correctly. Now we need our piston, our tiny little piston. And another E-clip, which I have to pick up with the tweezers. And I just dropped it. So then we sit our next... I know you can't see it because of my dumpy fingers. Set the next E-clip on top there. And I generally sort of support it with my finger there. Come in with the pliers, snap it in. Bob's your hermaphrodite, aren't he? So there's one piston done. I really struggle with these little E-clips sometimes. My fingers just don't work quite like they used to. Okay, so I'm going to just try and do it with the pliers this time, instead of using the edge of the bench. There we go. It's in there nicely. There's our piston. Our other E-clip. Again, just going to support it with my finger until I come in with the pliers. And clip that in. So we have this other part here, this MD2. It's a little brass plunger, I guess. That, what does it actually do? They're calling it a free piston. I guess it didn't cost anything for them to make it. What it actually does is, when you put the entire shock together, you see there's a tiny little spring in the top there. So, you know, in the CBAs where you got that that bladder in the top of the shock there, I think this free piston, as they're calling it, does basically the same thing. So those O-rings are kind of fiddly to get onto that piston, but people with more nimble fingers than me shouldn't have a problem. More dexterous fingers, I should say. Now we need to slide our pistons into our bodies, and it's not even telling you to lubricate them. So that's strange. I think I'm going to. Just a tiny little bit of shock oil. You do get shock oil in the kit, but I've got a bunch of it over here, so I'm just going to use sort of the half-empty bottles first, just for a little bit of lubrication for when it goes through that seal down the bottom. Poke that through like that. We'll do the other one. Now, usually when we're building CBA shocks, we do it off camera and then put a link to another video where we actually just build CBA shocks in the video. But these are completely different, so we're doing it on the video for you guys. So now our ball ends for the shocks. Now, I don't recommend holding the shaft with pliers like this, but it's all I got. It is actually telling you to, well, it just says be careful not to damage the piston rod, but it's showing you to put some kind of paper or maybe leather or something into the jaws of the pliers so you don't scratch the rod. And I would recommend you do that. So the other one started pretty easy. This one's taken a little bit more gumption. That one's actually quite tight. There we go. That just hit home. And so did that one. So that's our ball ends for our shock absorbers. Now we can fill them with oil, and sadly, our lovely shock stand from our good mate Pete. No good for these shocks. Okay. But that's all good. We shall get by. So, obviously takes very little. You only get a little oil bottle in the kit. They don't take much oil at all. But still the same principle as your CBAs. You still have to get all the air out. I know you guys can't see what I'm doing, but we've all built shocks before, haven't we? Unless this is your first kit, then you wouldn't have built shocks before. So if this is your first kit, if you're a little bit confused about oil dampers, we do have a separate video. it goes into a bit more detail about how they actually work and all that sort of stuff. So we have our free piston that slides in. Now it only goes, I guess it can go either way, but there's a concave section on one side that goes to the inside of the piston, and they give you this D8 part. It's just a little pushing tool with a recess, so that it lets all the oil flow through. And then you have to mount this tiny little screw into the top of that piston. Now, don't go getting tricky and think, well, I might as well just put the screw in first and then put the piston in. That'll be easier to hold. Well, then when you put the piston in, it won't let any air out. So the piston's just going to be bouncing up and down like this. So you kind of need to put that screw in last. So there is our free piston in, and the sealing screw, I guess you could call it. And it's telling you to wipe up any residue inside that chamber there, which we will do with my trusty rag. Actually, you know what might be better? Another very important tool in your workshop. Get a box of these. Worth their weight in gold sometimes. Just going to soak that up with the cotton bud. This is where your tiny little kind of helper spring comes in, and your screw cap. Actually, read the plan, man. Right, mate, I need whatever part that is. It's a black part. They're a part of the overall look of the shock, I reckon. So yeah, I'm just going to take that little spring back out. We can put our big spring on first. Now you do need to pull it back a little and use this D3 part. Then we can put our tiny little spring in and our screw cap. I'm so good at doing things and covering them up with my hands so you guys can't see. If there's one thing I'm good at, it's that. That actually feels really nice. Until about the first 3 or 4 times you run it, and then they start leaking. But they do feel like a nice shock when they're new. There's one. So I'm going to try and blitz through this one. Actually very little air in these tiny shocks. So it does say to fill up to a certain level, but it doesn't hurt to go over that level just a tiny bit, because whatever it doesn't need will come out through the hole in this piston. So there's our piston, there's our plunger. Push that into place. Wipe away the excess. Make sure to do it all off camera so you guys can't see. I'm just going to wipe up that first before I put that screw in. There is our screw into our piston. Now we can mount our spring. Uh-oh. Be careful you don't push the actual piston of the shock, because you'll probably just push everything back out and you've got to start again. I very nearly just did that. So there's our spring and our cap. And again, feels lovely. So there are your coil over oil dampers for your Tamiya Hornet. So, like I said, that's going to be the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your support. And we'll see you when we attach the rear dampers. Bye.